Hi guys! So we are going to work on tacking up Bodhi. He is all clean, he's already been brushed. You can see the floor is kind of dirty because he was nasty and his feet were kind of gross. So we're gonna go ahead and start getting stuff on him as long as he stands still and well. So our first thing is our saddle pad. We have a couple different things on our saddle pad that we check as we put on. So once it's on there, we want to make sure that that line in the center is right down the center of his back, and that these little tabs here are in the front rather than in the back. He has two different colors on his saddle pad. We want the colored side up and the white side down. Almost every saddle pad has the same thing. We want to make sure that this girth billet is right behind his elbow because that's where our girth goes. So the next thing we're gonna do is a half pad. So the half pad goes on just over our saddle pad. What this does, some of them have little ribs in the back to help bump up the back of our saddle. Some of them have little ribs in the front to help bump our saddle off of their withers and off of their shoulders. So this one is just a flat pad, and it's just designed to give a little bit more comfort in between his saddle and his back. So our next step is to actually put the saddle on his back. Now what's gonna happen, it's kind of heavy, so we're gonna heft it up there. We're gonna make sure that it's sitting in the right place. And these billets go down through the saddle pad there. And I'm gonna mess with the saddle pad a bit before I'm done. And you can see that we have to check the other side because sometimes it gets curled over on the other side as you put it on. So I'm just gonna pull this part down, and we're gonna put the billets in like this. And then I'm gonna go ahead and make sure it's all nice and straight down his back. And I'm going to lift my saddle pads into my saddle to make sure that there's no pinching down here on his withers. So everything's up into that saddle, and we wanna make sure that the billets are pretty close to behind his shoulder here. Behind his elbow, sorry. And we want to make sure that his shoulder isn't getting pinched by this saddle. So the point of his shoulder is right there, and we're going to make sure that nothing's pinching him, so he's good there. So our saddle is sitting pretty well. Sitting behind his shoulder, right there. The billets are on his belly, and everything looks pretty good. So the next step before I do anything else is to put his breastplate on, because with his jump saddle there is a chance that it would slide back and not sit correctly on him. So what I'm doing now is I'm putting the breastplate into the cross ties before I put it over his head so that he doesn't go anywhere, he doesn't leave. So you can see it sitting on his nose over the cross ties, and then I'm going to go ahead and slip it over his head. Make sure that the rope is through. So this breastplate goes across his chest. His chest is there, and then up, and it attaches to my saddle up here on the D-rings, and then it attaches down below between his legs to his girth. I'll show you guys that in just a second. So the top of my breastplate is now hooked on to the D-rings on the saddle, and we're gonna go ahead and put the girth, which is over there, through this section of the breastplate. So the girth slides through like that. And then we're gonna go ahead and hook the girth up to the saddle. So when we hook up the girth, we wanna make sure that the girth goes onto the rollers. So there's a roller section of the girth, and then there's a solid section. And you see the two openings. We wanna make sure we go through this top opening so that this buckle can buckle onto there. So I'm going to put the billet through the buckle. I'm going to pull up so that it gets tight. But not too tight. We want to make sure that he can still breathe. And then these all get tucked in. I want to make sure that my breastplate is sitting straight between his legs. And it's not, it's pretty crooked. So we're going to pull it sideways a bit. Make sure that it's straight. And now my breastplate's all hooked up. So this is designed to keep my saddle from sliding back when he gets moving a lot. So when we're doing gallop sets or when we're jumping or when we're doing stuff like that. So our next step is our bridle. We want to make sure that we always put our helmet on first. I'm not going to today because I am not actually going to ride Bodhi today. I'm just tacking him up to show you guys how to do it. So our next step after that is our bridle. He's going to use his jump bridle because it's brown and he's in a brown saddle. So we are going to first put reins over his head. Our reins are the long things that attach to our bit, which is down there, and they are what helps steer our pony. So they're gonna go up over his ears. Make sure that's over this ear too. There we go. And then what I'm gonna do now that I have my reins over is I'm going to unhook his cross ties because I have him with his reins over his head. And then I'm going to untie his halter. And then our next step is to actually put his bridle on. So I'm going to put my hand above his ears so that I can hold on to my bridle. My bridle goes between his ears and he's already opening his mouth to put his bit in. I'm going to get one ear over and then the next ear over. I'm going to make sure that his noseband is all situated and where it should be. I'm going to make sure that everything is sitting right on his face. So I want to make sure that his mane isn't stuck in his crown piece. I want to make sure his forelock isn't stuck in his brow band. And then I'm going to do up his noseband. And I'm going to make it kind of tight, not too tight. So I want to be able to fit some fingers in between his nose and his noseband. And I'm going to make sure that everything goes through his keepers. And then I'm going to do up his throat latch. Now his throat latch can't be too tight, can't be too loose, because that's what holds our bridle on if anything happens. So we want about a fist in between his cheek and his throat latch. Make sure that everything's in the keepers. Up. And then my last step is to go ahead and bring his reins over his head. I'm going to hold one hand up here and my second hand down low so that I can push on him if I need to, but my hand's not right up next to his face. Okay, so we're going to put our half pad on. This one has a little bit of a bump in the front of it to raise my dressage saddle off of his shoulder. So we're going to set it right up on there, make sure it's centered and everything. Next is the dressage saddle. So I'm going to put it on. I'm going to sit it down gently so that it doesn't slam down on his back and hurt him. I'm going to pull all of my saddle pads up into there, make sure that nothing is pinching him. I'm going to put the billets down through. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Make sure that everything is sitting straight. I'm going to put the billets through. I'm going to go ahead and grab my girth. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and use the same girth that we used with the jump saddle. We're going to put the billets through. I'm going to put it on like 5, just a few holes up because we have to tighten it on the other side first before we make it tight everywhere. We want to make sure that they're pretty even. I'm going to go ahead and go to the other side. I'm going to reach under his belly reach for my girth, slide the billets through. And we're going to make it kind of tight on this side, but we're going to go tighten it on the other side too, to make sure it's nice and snug. We don't want to be able to stick a hand through or anything. We want to make sure that it's nice and tight so that when we put our foot in our stirrup, we don't have the saddle slide sideways. So some people use a breastplate with their dressage saddle because if they're doing extended trots where the horse's shoulder moves a lot, the saddle could slide back. I don't use one with Bodhi because the saddle fits him pretty well and doesn't actually move very much. So we won't put a breastplate on him here. The girth is very similar to the jump saddle girth. The biggest difference is that the flap on a dressage saddle is way longer because when I put my stirrups down, my leg sits a lot lower on him. So when we tack and untack and when we're done riding, we always run our stirrups up to make sure that they don't bang the horse on the sides or they don't get caught on anything while we're walking the horse in or out. I don't tuck my stirrups, these stirrups through because I have sharp ridges on the bottom and I don't want my stirrup leathers getting torn up by those sharp edges. So we're going to first put Lily's saddle pad on. We're going to use an all-purpose saddle with Lily. So it's going to be similar to Bodhi's jump saddle, but a little bit different. Lily doesn't have the tabs in the front. We've cut them off, which we will do with most of our saddle pads because we don't really use them. So we'll judge by the girth keeper to make sure that it's in the correct place and it's not upside down because the color's on the top. And the line on her back goes straight down her spine. So it goes from her mane down her spine to make sure it's in the correct spot. We're going to put it pretty far forward so that the girth keeper is right behind her elbow. Okay, so our next step is to go ahead and put her saddle on. We're going to set it down gently on her. We're going to reach in and pull her saddle pad up into her saddle to make sure it doesn't pinch her through her withers or over her mane. We are going to go ahead and put her girth on. Her girth is called a shoulder relief girth. So it's got this little bit of a bow in it. This part goes in the front, this part goes in the back. So our next step is to lift the flap of the saddle so that we can get to the billets under here. Now you can use your shoulder or you can use your head to hold this part up so that you can see what you're doing. We're going to use the first billet, goes through the first hole on the roller. We're going to hook it up. I always do first on the left side so that if I need to, when I go to get on, I can tighten it before I actually get on. So it's always on the first hole on this side for me with an all-purpose saddle. So I'm going to go around Lily. I'm going to be safe about going around Lily by touching her butt as I go around the back of her to get to the other side. I'm going to reach under her belly to grab her girth. Her girth is way longer than Bodhi's girth because it needs to reach up to these billets up here. So I'm going to go through the keeper, the girth keeper. This is what keeps your saddle pad in place. And I'm going to tighten this side a decent amount to make sure that I can then tighten the other side and be done with tightening her girth before her rider gets on her. Everything should lay flat under here. We don't have to tuck anything in, and then our flap should lay flat on top of that. Always make sure that the tail end of your stirrup is not caught up underneath of the saddle because it could pinch them or hurt them in some way. We want to make sure that her saddle is sitting in the right place, so it should be behind her shoulder. Her girth should be right behind her elbows, and her saddle should be sitting over her withers. With our trail bridle, we're going to put our reins over her neck so that they hang to her sides. And then we're going to go ahead and put her bit in. So with these, she's super excited about her bit. With these, we need to make sure that the keepers are on the outside we're gonna put it in between her teeth, and then we're going to hook it to one side, and then we're gonna hook it to the other side. Now where her bit sits in her mouth, she has no teeth. Let's see if I can get it. She has no teeth. She has teeth up front to grab grass with, and then she has teeth way back here to be able to grind her food with. So when we're pulling on her bit, when we're pulling on her mouth, we're pulling on the soft corners of her mouth. So right in here, and on the bars of her mouth, her gums, and that's what steers her. We are then going to hook her reins up to the back side of her bit so that when you pull, you have no interference anywhere on her bit.